Every football season kicks off with the Community Shield. On the surface, it's just one match, right? One trophy. But what if a single game could actually tell us the entire story of modern football? I'm talking about the money, the crazy rules, the power struggles, everything. This year, the real story wasn't just on the pitch. It was on the balance sheets. The legendary Sir Alex Ferguson famously called it a barometer for fitness. For years, it's had this reputation as a glorified friendly, a chance for teams to shake off the summer rust before the Premier League season really gets going. And yeah, managers love to downplay its importance. But this year, that barometer gave us a reading that went way beyond just player fitness. So, here's the result that kicked everything off. You've got the Premier League champs Liverpool taking on the FA Cup winners Crystal Palace at Wembley. It ends in a 2-2 draw, goes to penalties, and Palace lifts the shield for the first time in their history. A bit of a shocker, for sure. But the real story, the one we're here to talk about, is what happened next. What if this supposed friendly was actually the first tremor before a massive earthquake? That on-field action triggered a chain reaction, one that exposed all these invisible forces that are shaping the world's richest league. Okay, so this is where a single result spirals into a multi-million-pound drama. That one loss at Wembley didn't just stay on the pitch. It sent immediate shockwaves rattling through the transfer market. After the match, Liverpool's new manager, Arne Slot, was pretty blunt. His attackers scored, but the team conceded 2 goals. So his diagnosis was simple. We need to be better defensively. Makes sense. But the club's reaction? Well, it suggested they thought the problem might be at the other end of the pitch, too. Just days after that loss, reports start flying that Liverpool had slapped down a massive £110 million bid for Newcastle United's star striker Alexander Isak. I mean, wow, that is a powerful statement of intent. Was it a knee-jerk reaction? Or maybe it was a calculated move to exploit a weakness they spotted, not just in their own team, but in a rival's. And that bid, it didn't just test Newcastle's resolve, it basically tore their fan base in 2. For some, Isak was a hero, the guy who scored the winning goal for their first trophy in 70 years. But to others, he was suddenly the villain. You see fans online calling him greedy, saying his head's been turned, and that he completely wrecked the transfer window. It created a full-blown crisis, and that crisis was pretty much confirmed by the Newcastle manager, Eddie Howe. Isak was now training away from the first team. So the big question is why? Why couldn't one of the wealthiest clubs in the world just reject the bid and keep their star player happy? Well, the answer lies in a set of rules that, it turns out, control everything. See, the answer isn't about one player's loyalty. It's about this complex financial web that every single club is caught in. To really get this whole saga, you have to understand the invisible rules of the game. Let me introduce you to PSR, the Profit and Sustainability Rules. In simple terms, they're there to stop clubs from spending endless amounts of cash they don't actually have. They limit the losses a club can rack up over a 3-year period. And what that means is, it doesn't matter how rich your owners are, your spending is tied directly to your revenue. It's the Premier League's own version of financial fair play. And you can see exactly why these rules were needed when you look at the absolute explosion in global transfer spending. According to a CIES Football Observatory report, spending nearly tripled in less than a decade. It hit a record €12.4 billion in 2023. The market was just overheating, and the league had to do something. So, who's driving all this spending? You guessed it. England. Premier League clubs spent a wild €4.7 billion in 2023. That's more than the next 3 biggest leagues put together. But check out the new player on the block, Saudi Arabia. Their spending shot up by a mind-boggling 1,310% in just 1 year. This is the financial pressure cooker the Premier League is operating in. In fact, the Premier League's financial grip on the sport has only gotten tighter. Before the pandemic, it made up about a quarter of all global spending. After the pandemic, that share jumped to over a third. This growing dominance is exactly why those PSR rules within the league are so critical. And this is where those rules really start to bite. They create completely different realities for clubs, even for ones with incredibly wealthy owners. Which brings us right back to this standoff between Liverpool and Newcastle. This data right here tells the whole story. Over the last decade, Liverpool's net spend on players was a pretty big negative 461 million euros. But look at Newcastle's, even higher, at negative 671 million. That larger deficit is precisely what restricts their spending power under PSR. It basically forces them to sell players before they can even think about buying new ones. So you get this fascinating dynamic of old power versus new money. On one side, you have Liverpool, a global giant with a pretty sustainable financial track record. On the other, you have Newcastle, backed by one of the world's richest sovereign wealth funds, but handcuffed by the very rules meant to control spending. Liverpool's bid for Isak wasn't just about buying a great player. It was a strategic move, using the rulebook itself to put maximum financial pressure on a rising rival. And Eddie Howe pretty much admitted it himself, saying PSR is controlling their transfer business. To make matters worse, the club has been in this state of flux, trying to navigate this incredibly critical time without a permanent CEO or a sporting director. This mix of financial pressure and internal instability created what you could only call a dysfunctional situation, and it made them vulnerable. So, let's tie this all together. The Community Shield gets dismissed all the time, but this single match, this so-called friendly, it basically tore back the curtain and revealed the deep fault lines running through the entire Premier League. So what are the big takeaways from all this? First, a friendly match can expose some seriously deep financial problems. Second, ambition alone isn't enough. These complex PSR rules are the real gatekeepers in the transfer market. This whole thing proves that a club's wealth doesn't automatically guarantee spending power. And finally, the game on the pitch and the game in the boardroom, they are one completely interconnected system. Which leaves us with a final massive thought. We're in an era where the top clubs have net spending deficits in the hundreds of millions, sometimes even billions. It really forces you to ask a fundamental question about the economics of the whole sport. Is constantly spending more than you earn the only real way to compete for the biggest trophies? The story of this one match suggests the answer is anything but simple.